Good morning. I'm Laura Lacey. I'm the Executive Director of the Milken Institute's Asia Center. Welcome to the 8th episode of the webinar series, The World Post-COVID-19. Every week until the mid of June, the Asia Center of the Milken Institute is hosting short and to-the-point conversations to address the transformations that will shape the world post-COVID-19. Today's episode will focus on North Korea, the stability of its current leadership, and also the potential impact on global geopolitics. This discussion will be moderated by James Crabtree, Associate Professor and Senior Fellow at the LKY School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. Before I pass it on to James, I would like to share with you what the Milken Institute is currently doing on COVID-19. Our Faster Cure Center is posting daily updates on the development of 219 treatments and 140 vaccines from around the world. To further explore the situation, this week Mike Milken hosted the CEO of Moderna, the company that seems to be on track for the development of a vaccine. They talked about the leadership in time of Corona, how to set competition aside, and the risks and benefits of developing a vaccine in a fast-paced environment. You can find all of our trackers and information on COVID-19 on our website. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass on to James, who will be moderating our 8th episode. Thank you so much, James.
Or in Asia and in the afternoon in California. We've only got half an hour, so I'm going to rattle through this very quickly. I want to welcome our panelists. So firstly, we have Anna Fifield, Beijing Bureau Chief of the Washington Post, also author of this fabulous book, which you should all buy, on North Korea. Dr. John Park, who is director of the Korea Project at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, although he joins us this morning from California, and Bob Kelly, who's professor of political science at Pusan National University. So we're going to try and cover the waterfront in our half an hour, moving from the state of the North Korean regime through what's happening with COVID-19, right through to the US election. But let's just start where we should probably start, Anna, which is what exactly happened last month with this strange death of Stalin episode. What do we know, if anything, about what happened to Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, well, we don't know what happened to Kim Jong-un, and probably we never will. You know, there was a lot of rumor about him. There's always a lot of rumor about the leadership in North Korea there. But I think the reason why this one gained traction was because it seemed quite believable that this very obese 36-year-old who can clearly be seen having trouble breathing would have some kind of heart-related incident. So I think there was an element of credibility in there that gave it legs. I think in reality, probably he was social distancing. You know, North Korea is pretty good at social distancing at the best of times. He was probably holed up somewhere to protect himself against the coronavirus. As you know, North Korea is right next to China. There had been a lot of back and forth. We'd seen officials wearing masks around him, and China had told us they donated a lot of PPE and test equipment to North Korea. So I think that seems the most likely explanation. But the whole debacle just shows us, you know, how little we know about Kim Jong-un and about the workings of that regime.
Yeah, good opportunity for North Korea experts to write articles saying you've got no idea what's going on, which is quite chastening. Bob, I mean, do you basically agree with that? It was just a big nothing burger. Nothing really happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, he showed up, a couple of weeks later, walking around looking reasonably, healthy. I don't want to say fit, but I think it raised sort of the larger issues of what happens in the future. I mean, he's pretty clearly unhealthy. I mean, the Kim family is sort of known for its kind of Nero-like lifestyle of indulgence and drinking too much and women and everything else, and all this is just going to catch up with him. I mean, he's already morbidly obese. The South Korean National Intelligence Service tries to track his weight, and they estimate that his BMI is something like 43 or 44. He smokes. I mean, at some point, his physical issues will catch up with him, and there will be big questions about the leadership, who would take over. And I think that's the real takeaway from this, the issue of succession, who would take over. There was a lot of, his children are too young, so there's a lot of focus on his sister, but his sister is a woman in a country in what's very sort of patriarchal, reactionary gender norms, and so there's a lot of discussion, would the old guard in North Korea accept her? If they didn't, what would happen? Would she become a figurehead? Would there be sort of internal factional conflict? And so I think that's really the big takeaway. At some point, physical issues will become an issue, just as they were for his father. His father also sort of drank himself to death. It's worth noting. He had a pancreatic stroke in 2008 from his alcoholism. And so, if that happens this time again, then the leadership question becomes alive again.
John, do you want to pick this up? I mean, what in a sense does this episode tell us about the character of the North Korean regime beyond its inscrutability, and what about this issue of the potential succession?
Sure, James, I think this is going to be recurring. We're going to encounter this whenever he is absent from the scene. The rumors will start to circulate that there's some sort of catastrophic health crisis here. But the thing to remember is that when you look and open the aperture here, it is a family-run business. North Korea is like North Korea Incorporated. You're looking at multi-generations. In the current generation, there's only one clear leader. So if you look at any situation where there's a single leader, there's opacity of what comes next, you're going to see very similar dynamics play out. The two key things I'd point out, one, in this area, one of the areas that I think is the known, but we don't focus enough attention, is the Communist Party of China, Workers' Party of Korea relationship. There's an ongoing interaction there. It's a very dysfunctional relationship. There's a lot of mutual mistrust and animosity there, but it is working. It's a functional channel there. The second thing I quickly mention as well, when it comes to the leadership structure, the party aspect is unique because the Workers' Party of Korea under Kim Jong-un has elevated to a level that is really profound. And when you look at the institution of the Workers' Party of Korea, there's more of this layer aspect to it than there was in the past. So there isn't a clear successor, but as an organization, there is something of a caretaker organization function that the party could play.
What do we know about Kim Yo Jong, the leader's sister, who suddenly shot to prominence as the most likely speculative successor, were to suddenly pass on?
Yeah, well, I would agree with Bob and his previous point there that it seems like really impossible to think that she could become the leader because she's a woman, and North Korea is this incredibly chauvinistic, I guess, Confucian hierarchical society. And it's one thing for the 80-year-old generals to take orders from a young man, but I think quite another for them to take orders from a young woman. So I really struggle to imagine how she could succeed. But at the same time, I kind of struggle to imagine how she could not succeed because this whole system is built on the myth of the Kim family, or the revolutionary kind of quasi-deity Kim family that has this mythical Paektu blood running through their veins. And she's the only member of the family who has any kind of public role in North Korea. So if they were going to try to continue to push this legitimacy line, then I mean she's the only one who could really stake a claim to that, which I think makes it very clear the gaps in North Korea at the moment, and that there really is no succession plan. I can't imagine that this uncle that's on the scene would take over. He's from the kind of wrong branch of the family. It's hard to see how the system could keep going if it was not a Kim. But North Korea has defied all expectations in the past. So I try to stop from speculating too much on that. But I think, the whole incident showed us the vacuum that could be created if Kim Jong-un was to disappear suddenly for whatever reason, and the kind of gap that would leave in this crucial region. And one of the things that really struck me most of all about this time was the fact that the United States and China were not able to communicate on a matter of mutual interest here. Like in the past, even during times of rocky diplomatic relations, they have been able to talk about North Korea and about issues like this that concern them both. But as far as I know right now, there's been no communication between these two sides during this period about what might happen to North Korea. And that's concerning to all of us.
Bob, you wrote a piece during the speculation about all of this in which you compared the North Korean regime to a monarchy. So John said it's like a family business. You said it's a monarchy. Zooming out a bit, how is the monarchy's grip on power at the moment? Is Kim reasonably popular and secure, or is it a bit more dicey than that?
Well, any kind of public opinion on North Korea, of course, is really difficult, right? North Koreans, when you see those videos of people sort of cheering and clapping and stuff like that, all of that is obviously forced, right? We just really don't know what North Koreans' genuine preferences are. It is noteworthy, though, that there's never been a revolt inside North Korea. There's never been anything like the Velvet Revolution in Eastern Europe or Arab Spring. This does sort of bolster the idea that North Korea must have some ground level legitimacy because there's never been any pushback from below. The larger issue though of the monarchy, right? I think gets to what Hannah was just talking about, right? Where and sort of John, like the family business, right? You have to keep somebody within the sort of bloodline at the top of the pile. And right now, the list of people who are qualified to do that is really thin. I think the real trick for Kim is to sort of like keep his health issues under control long enough for his kids to get old enough, right? The rumors are that his oldest kid is maybe 5, which means he's got to hang on for another 15 years or something like that, 20 years maybe, before sort of a traditional monarchic succession, which is what happened the last 2 times, becomes viable. Without that, then it becomes harder, right? Then you're sort of casting around, like you said, for sort of half brothers and uncles and stuff like that. And at that point, you wonder if the army might just sort of make these guys into figureheads and then take over behind the scenes or something like that. I mean, that's where all the speculation comes from. So Kim's got to like control his health long enough that his kids can grow up. I think it's sort of the real challenge in terms of the family business.
John, let me ask you about COVID-19. So every country in the world is struggling with this at the moment. How is North Korea faring? So Anna thinks perhaps this episode was Kim socially distancing himself, but just in general, what sort of a challenge does this present to the North Korean regime, or perversely, is it actually good for them?
Well, the North Korean healthcare system, as we all know, is very fragile to begin with. And so something like COVID-19 is an existential threat to the North Korean leadership. So this is an area that, frankly, is a puzzle, because North Korea was the first country in the region to seal its borders, and we saw this in early January. The puzzle is that North Korea has officially stated there's 0 cases of COVID-19, but through other sources, we haven't really seen any notes of outbreaks or anything like that. The North Korean authorities also at the same time has been pretty transparent in issuing reports of the number of cases of individuals with the symptoms that look like COVID-19. So they are tracking it. They're trying to message to the outside that they're dealing with it through the quarantine and other measures. But COVID-19 in and of itself, I think the puzzle is that it hasn't been this big shock to North Korea that many had anticipated. But we do see a lot of communication from the Chinese side and very public offers of assistance on COVID-19, which I think is striking. The latest one came from Xi Jinping himself, reiterating again Chinese offer of assistance to help on COVID-19.
So I want to come back to this issue of ties with China. Let me, Anna, could you give us a sense of, again, the answer is probably we don't know, but in a sense, the state of the North Korean economy. So Milken's audience is predominantly a business audience. In your book, one of the main themes that ran through was the modernization of the North Korean economy under Kim, and the fact that you now have high-rise condos in Pyongyang, and albeit ones with lifts that don't work, so you want apartment at the bottom, both within the context of COVID and more generally. How is the North Korean economy doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to pick up on something John said there, like North Korea is extremely paranoid about these kind of health challenges, right? So in 2015, when Ebola was breaking out in West Africa, like half a world away, North Korea also closed its borders and kept them closed for months at that time, because I think they are so concerned about the prospect of a health, an outbreak there and not being able to deal with it. So shutting the borders is really extreme for them. But something they've shown that they're willing to do. But the economy is entirely dependent on trade with China. Like 90% of China's trade goes to or through China. So this is an extreme measure for them to take. When we look at the state of the economy over the past 8 years of Kim Jong-un, he inherited an economy that was in pretty bad shape, and it remains in bad shape, but slightly less bad shape, than it was when he took it over. Because, he has allowed some market forces to be unleashed inside North Korea. So that has that in different ways across the country. So if you're a fat cat businessman, with a position in the party or the military, live in Pyongyang, you have been able to get quite corrupt and quite rich under Kim Jong-un by making money on the sides of your contracts. And these are the people who live in these apartment towers, these big fancy high rises that have gone up in Pyongyang. Yeah, they have not enough pressure to get the water above the 4th floor, or not enough electricity to get the elevators running. I've heard reports that they're built without any rebar in a 70-floor building. So it's just like the Potemkin village got a bit more fancy looking on the outside in many ways. But this does look like and feel like to the masters of money in North Korea like an improvement in their life, and they now have a a vested interest in keeping Kim Jong-un in power more than ever because they have gotten rich underneath him. And as for the general population out there outside of Pyongyang, I think their lives remain generally extremely difficult. I mean, starvation is not a problem in North Korea anymore, but malnutrition is. It remains widespread. People still really struggle to get by. But because these markets are tolerated more and more different kinds of trading fall into the gray category in the middle, people have been able to earn their way to a higher standard of living under Kim Jong-un. And this is not because he cares about the people. I mean, we definitely know he does not care about the people, but because he wants to be able to take the credit for an improvement in the economy and the standard of living there inside North Korea. I think he knows, his father was 52 when he took over and only had to hang in for a little bit longer. Kim Jong-un was 27. I think he knows that if he wants to remain the leader for decades to come, he can't just hang in there. He needs to oversee a tangible improvement in the economy.
John, you, I think, have been looking at the issue of sanctions. I wonder if you want to jump in here and give us your sense of the North Korean economy, in particular with respect to its ties with China and that link.
Sure. I mean, we investigated the puzzle, increasing application of sanctions on North Korea after missile tests, nuclear tests. North Korea was able to find ways to procure the items they need with more efficiency and more effectiveness. And so again, the puzzle, if you're applying more antibiotics on the very mechanisms in the North Korean regime that's designed to go out and get the procurement, what's going on? And so the Chinese marketplace plays a big role in that. And the idea of North Korean procurement officers operating in China and Southeast Asia, using the elevated risk of doing business as a way to parlay that into higher commission fees, led to pretty sophisticated business channels. But the part right now that I think is striking is that during the period of symmetry, we saw the Chinese side reduce their implementation of sanctions. And also now a lot of reports in terms of a rebound in trade numbers prior to COVID. So there is a lot of leakage going on. And I think the sanctions piece gives you a sense of how there is a development of political relationship between the two parties, but monetization happens below at the business level. And that's an area that we're watching closely because COVID is the biggest shock to that. This has nothing to do with sanctions in this instance, but for the North Koreans to voluntarily seal their border, there's debate about the effectiveness of sanctions. When a country seals its own borders and seizes up that trade, this is where we start to focus more on what's happening with the smuggling networks. And the quick thing I'd add there is smuggling networks by their nature are transmission mechanisms. So the longer this self-imposed quarantine continues and there's more of this smuggling initially related to the sanctions evasion, that could potentially be the transmission route for human transmission of COVID into different parts of North Korea.
Let's talk a little bit about the peace process or the process that happened after the Singapore summit a couple of years ago. Anna, if I can come back to you and then I'll go to Bob. Could you tell us, how does this look from China's point of view? And I suppose I'm thinking from almost an internal Chinese political point of view at the moment. China has a lot on its hands with COVID, Hong Kong, potentially Taiwan. I mean, looked at from Beijing, what are they trying to achieve with North Korea at the moment?
Yeah, I think China likes to be able to ignore North Korea. They like it when North Korea is quiet and stable and not creating any problems for them. We can already see that Xi Jinping thinks very little of Kim Jong-un. And they had successfully ignored each other for 6 years until Donald Trump came along and wanted to meet Kim Jong-un. I think during that period, of course, we saw Kim Jong-un be pragmatic and know that he had to come out and see Xi Jinping first of all before meeting anyone else. And also Xi Jinping tried to make sure that he had an influence in this whole process. So I think through that process, he was able to I guess, have his say to Kim Jong-un and insert himself into the process, but also able to get rid of maximum pressure. As soon as this diplomacy started happening, the specter of American kind of military action in any form on the Korean Peninsula receded, and Xi Jinping was able to go back to kind of business as usual. So I think, as you say, they've got all sorts of issues on all of their borders, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Xinjiang, all sorts of issues going on. They certainly don't want any more instability anywhere else on their borders. So I think they're probably quite happy with the situation right now.
Bob, imagine you're a financial investor in the West. Being perfectly frank about this, the reason you care about North Korea is the threat of some kind of destabilizing incident in the region that has spillovers, more nuclear tests, missiles, that kind of thing. I know this is very speculative, but we recently, in the aftermath of Kim Jong-un's disappearance, saw some live firing over the border. I mean, is it possible to have any sense of where the North Korean regime is? Is it going to become more aggressive or less aggressive? Is it hard to say?
Provocations are sort of built into the ideology, right? I mean, North Korea needs to explain why unification never happened. South Korea has to be sort of, North Koreans know now that South Korea is wealthier, healthier, happier, because, has people have sports cars and nice suits and PlayStations and all this kind of stuff. So North Korea needs to explain why North Koreans can't have this stuff that the ethnic compatriots do. And so you have to have tension with South Korea. Now, the North Koreans obviously don't want that to boil over into conflict. They're not going to win that conflict, right? But you do need kind of like a regular series of provocations. And that's why this stuff continues to happen. But it's all fairly low level. And I don't think anybody really reads that as sort of like a possible, it's like a spiral into major conflict. I think in the long, so beyond that, which I think is sort of kind of provocations that we expect, right? Are kind of like expected instabilities, expected small instabilities along the way. I would actually argue that North Korea is actually pretty stable now. They're not going to give up their nuclear weapons. They have them. That provides them with a deterrent. Then they don't have to worry about an Iraq-style scenario anymore, right? And so the North Koreans just kind of sit back and wait and see if Donald Trump offers them anything meaningful, if Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, offers them anything meaningful, anything commensurate to swap maybe some of their weapons. And if they don't, the North Koreans just clam up and continue to do what they do, trade with China and sort of work on the black market to bring goods in for North Korea for elites. No, I think the getting nuclear weapons and missiles a couple of years ago brought North Korea now to a position where they can basically just sort of sit and wait for the world to come to them and ask them to deal. The North Koreans don't have to be, they're not in a position of requesting from us anymore. Now they can wait for us to come to them. And I think that's why they played so tough with Donald Trump across the 3 summits. They didn't give him anything because Trump didn't offer him very much.
Just, I'll come to Trump in just a second to close the discussion. But talk to us a little bit about the politics in South Korea, where you're based. So Moon Jae-in just won a landslide election. The more hardline right in South Korea is now in full retreat. Does that create the space for anything at all, or ultimately is the fate of North Korea decided in Washington and Beijing? What room for maneuver does South Korea have?
Right. Well, it creates space for Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea. The South Korean left really wants détente. The South Korean left really wants to find some kind of relationship with North Korea that exceeds the sort of long-term Cold War kind of stasis of the last several decades. Right. But Moon Jae-in is kind of in a tight spot here because South Korea is allied to the United States. The American alliance is very popular in South Korea. And so if Moon pushes too hard on what the Americans want, which is sanctions and maximum pressure, then Moon sort of gets cross-pressured by public opinion. Right. And that's why even though Moon's now in his fourth year of his presidency, right, he's still not gotten that much out of North Korea, even though of all of South Korea's presidents, he's probably the most dovish. He's the one who's most wanted to deal with North Korea. And he still hasn't managed to pull one out. And that's because, one, the North Koreans are asking for a lot. And two, the Americans are sort of pulling the chain all the time, saying you can't just run off and offer the North Koreans assistance and agricultural cooperation and rail links and stuff like that. You have to work with us too. And so Moon can sort of push back a little bit, but he can't just sort of go off and do a kind of like, Ostpolitik or something like that on his own. He just can't, because South Korea's roped to the Americans and the alliance is just too popular here.
John, where stands the post-Singapore summit kind of process? There were a series of commitments made, a pathway towards some kind of process of denuclearization, which nobody really believed. Has that all basically ground into the dust now, or is it still kind of plowing on in the background? Is there anything happening on that side of things?
Piecing together some of the views in the region, but particularly what North Koreans have said themselves. After Hanoi, the Singapore summit that process launch of the Singapore summit was dead. And they tried to establish if there was anything there one last time. The Panmunjom meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, I think, was the last part of it this past summer. The key thing there, though, is that Kim Jong-un made promises on the economic development, economic prosperity front. And so those promises were very explicit. The expectations were raised inside of North Korea. those expectations weren't met. In one sense, the whole COVID-19 component of it gives them the opportunity to say that had to deal with this emergency. But I think interesting part of it right now is that there has been a consistency in the phrase unveiling this new strategic weapon. I wouldn't treat that lightly. I think there is a timetable baked into that. Some aspects of going into the presidential election cycle in the US as well. But that's a piece of it that I think is linked to Hanoi, because one of the things that came out of Hanoi was, the US won't give what the North Koreans wanted because they didn't value their nuclear weapons program that high. And so if you on the spot reduce the bargaining power of the North Koreans, then the question is, how are the North Koreans going to elevate their bargaining position again? This is where I think the whole terminology of new strategic weapon for that particular purpose becomes very intriguing.
Let's just close by talking about the US election. So, John, maybe you can give us your view, and then Anna, and then Bob. I mean, what difference is this going to make? Is there any likelihood of some out of left field Trump initiative in the run into the election? And in a sense, does it matter terribly which of Trump or Biden is elected in the fall? John, go ahead, and then Anna.
In the US-North Korea context, the whole value of the nuclear weapons program, I think, is crucial. So irrespective of President Trump getting reelected or Vice President Biden become President Biden, the whole notion of revisiting the dynamics in Hanoi, I think that's a priority for the North Koreans right now. And with that, I think the logic is important in terms of building that up until the fall. One quick thing I'd end up on is the point that the interesting thing about Kim Jong-un going missing for a while, if he does that periodically, kind of normalizes this whole disappearing, the rumor mill showing up again, he's able to do that up to September. I think he can remove that element of speculation and undermining his regime and his leadership structure, and then focus on this idea of rebuilding the value of what he had pre-Singapore. So how does he build up all of the terms and the conditions leading up to Singapore and try to restart that after rebuilding the value of his program, to me, is a big part of what we'll see in September, tied with the US election.
So Anna, Bob, we have 2 minutes left, so a minute each. Anna, if I can put it bluntly, if you're Kim Jong-un, who do you want to win, Trump or Biden?
I absolutely want Trump to win. And in fact, I mean, the North Koreans, one of the things I found out during reporting my book was that the North Koreans actually consulted a fortune teller to find out if Trump would be reelected, because they really wanted to know. And the answer was yes. I think the reason for that is because, I mean, it took them a long time to figure Trump out at the beginning, to figure out whether to take his tweets seriously, as for many countries in the world, in fact. But now they see in him a real opportunity. The fact that he is so unconventional, that he's prepared to ignore all his advisors and to go meet 3 times, that he's prepared to explain away North Korea's human rights abuses and helped Kim with his kind of makeover into, misunderstood, benevolent, developmental dictator, which is, I think, how Kim wants to be seen. That's a real gift for North Korea. So I think they very much want him to be there. And just one more thing quickly, 10 seconds, is that I think, looking at this whole incident of the disappearance and things, I think Kim Jong-un is now beginning to do things his own way. He's feeling confident. He's in his 9th year in power. He didn't give a New Year's address, as has been normal. He didn't show up on April the 15th to the mausoleum. So I think we can expect more of this, that he is also going to be an unconventional North Korean leader.
Bob, quick final minute from you, then I'll hand over to Laura to close.
Sure. I think if you're Donald Trump and you're really losing, if you're really far behind, why not take a Hail Mary and meet the North Koreans again, right? Trump has already sort of invested a fair amount in doing this. We know that Trump kind of hoped that this would become sort of his big foreign policy legacy, right? He sort of complained a lot. He didn't get a Nobel Prize nomination and things like that for this. He gave a lot of speeches, as Anna said, saying Kim Jong-un wasn't such a bad guy. They fell in love and stuff like that. I mean, Trump's actually carried a fair amount of water against the hawkish consensus in the United States that North Korea is sort of this Orwellian tyranny. And Trump pushed back on that, not terribly successfully, in my opinion, but he tried. But he didn't get very much. So I think if Trump was sort of ahead, or if the race was close, he'd be like, whatever, this didn't work. We'll just put some photo ops in our commercials. But if Trump really falls behind, right, he's got no reason not to go, meet Kim again and maybe offer something really outlandish, at least just for the sort of the upbeat photos and the sort of image of, being a dynamic president and stuff like that. But unless the Americans offer North Korea something really valuable, commensurate with nuclear weapons, the North Koreans won't budge, and so nothing will come of it anyway. Sorry, that's a downer ending, but it's probably true.
In my mind, is an upbeat ending, which means that this topic is going to get more interesting, not less, which always seems to the way. Anna, John, Robert, many thanks. Thank you, all of you, for listening. I'm just going to hand over to Laura just for 30 seconds at the end, but thank you all very much. We covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So, Laura, over to you.
Okay, thank you, James, and I'm going to give you a virtual round of applause on behalf of our listeners. I just would like to plug next week's webinar, which is going to focus on philanthropic efforts. We're going to have Lawrence Liam from Singapore, Andrew Forrest from Australia, and Vinod Chaudhry from Nepal talking about how their philanthropy has been working towards mitigating the human and economic effects of COVID-19. So please join us for that. Thank you all again. Have a good day.